It's finally time. The Outlast Trials has been fully released, and if you're a long-time Outlast fan and horror game fan, then you're probably as excited as I am. And with the full release have come multiple new trials, documents, and small details that I have the pleasure of breaking down for you guys. Now, very briefly before we begin, if you've watched our previous video on the channel explaining all the story points found within the beta of Outlast Trials, then just be warned that we will be going over much of the same details described in that video, but obviously adding in all the missing pieces that we didn't have back then and some of the smaller details that are now revealed to us. And this video will be a big one. I debated shortening it, but felt that it would be a disservice to the story, so we will be covering absolutely everything that we can in this video. So strap in, it's going to be a long journey. Without further ado, let's break down the story. Our very first scene is that of a mouse trying to reach the pills at the bottom of the bottle. In reality, a pretty fitting metaphor for the lab rats that are taking part in Murkoff's new facility. We pan to a flyer as it's swept away by the wind, landing on a nearby homeless person. As the person looks at the flyer, we can see that it's asking for people that are lost, lonely, poor or confused, stating that the miracles of science that Murkoff can provide them will give them purpose, since the world owes them everything. They accept people of any gender, race, religion, class or political viewpoint, and all you have to do is stop by one of their convenient volunteer charitable outreach centres before the opportunity is gone forever. And you might be wondering, what does this gracious opportunity look like? Yeah, not very good. This is how people lose kidneys, I'm telling you. You can see the participants are being transported while hooded and wheeled into this new facility. When the hood is taken off, it's a complete horror show. I will have to blur a lot during the video since YouTube, but trust me, it's definitely not the sight you were hoping to see when you were promised miracles. A doctor wheels over a table while lowering a television. The man on the television tells the participant not to be afraid and assures them that they will be safe, all while giving them a goddamn eye injection. The man introduces himself as Hendrik Juliet Easterman, a name that is worth remembering as he will play a big role in the events to come. He continues by explaining that he is a friend, and along this journey you will be reborn into a whole new you. The doctor at this stage has finished removing the device from the head of the deceased Reagent. They begin by mentioning how the table consists of all of your belongings found on your person, your public records, and also a privately conducted investigation into your private life. Murkoff attempts to find out every aspect of a person's life to be completely sure that nothing could possibly come back to bite them later. She asks if we consent to collections, and the other gracious doctor gives us a hand by making us nod. Very kind of him, I must say. They begin drilling the device into the head of the patient, which is of course the signature Outlast night vision, in this case some night vision goggles. We awake sometime later in the hallway of a building, with a significant amount of blood loss still on the floor. As we reach further into the building, we can finally get our eyes on what exactly this place is that Murkoff built. Televisions state to erase your past, while an entire house has been built within this giant warehouse, much like a movie set, filled with mannequins and odd real dead guys here and there. You can even see the employees of Murkoff watching you as you enter the building for the very first time, keeping an eye on everything. We are greeted by a mannequin that is welcoming us home, asking if it's how we remembered so we can burn it all down once and for all. The televisions in many of the rooms say to proceed with preconditioning. That means the preconditioning of mind control, to set the Regent down the psychological path to change his or her own views and ambitions to that of the Murkoff Corporation. We get into a room that shows a mannequin woman over the crib of a baby. Easterman narrates that the birth was the most destructive thing that you have ever done to the world, before stating that you must forget the past in order to embrace the future, to abandon your birth. Our mannequin host escorts us to the next room, and we can now see a scene of early childhood. Easterman explains that even before you could speak, you have instincts, before dismissing them as nothing more than the instincts of an animal, that we must forget them. Slowly but surely attempting to erase the previous life of the Regent piece by piece. A child learns discipline, both rewards and punishment, and a truly disciplined child is thankful for both. We can see some writing on a nearby wall in the kitchen from a previous Regent, straight up saying that dying is easier, really putting into perspective just how bad of a situation we truly find ourselves in. Some singing can be heard from the nearby theatre as a bunch of child mannequins are watching a show. As we approach the apple, we are introduced to Dr. Futterman, the hand puppet of Mother Gooseberry. It essentially explains how the doctor is going to rip out our previous self and put in something better. Once outside, Easterman hits a critical strike on us, saying that we surely love somebody in our life even if they didn't love us back. Oof. We are now allowed upstairs to what the host calls adulthood, as Mother Gooseberry gives us a front row seat to what will happen if we are unwilling to forget our previous self. This gives us a slight opportunity to receive our public record. Easterman tells us that our job, work, or purpose are all what the world thought we were. It's time to destroy it and free ourselves and become something new. Along with the box filled with things from a private investigation containing all the secrets that we have in our life, the way Easterman is explaining it would suggest that our character has done some pretty crazy stuff, something that you would take to your deathbed even. But he reminds us that we now have an opportunity to start over. Once all the files have been destroyed, we make our way to the chair before the television once again falls from the roof. Easterman praises us for our rehabilitation and congratulates us on our new life, before explaining that we will now be sent to the sleeping quarters, a place where we can reflect. This particular place serves as an in-between for the Reagents as they come and go from their trials. The facility is watched closely by the eye of Murkoff and many different parts containing scientists and staff members that can observe. We can even get a very interesting look at an individual in a wheelchair that approaches the upper windows. I strongly believe this to actually be Dr. Rudolph Wernick from Outlast 1, the person responsible for the Walrider project at Mount Massive Asylum. He can be seen observing the Reagents. If the Reagents find themselves slightly peckish, it's equipped with a kitchen for all the top quality dining experiences that a growing Murkoff Reagent could possibly need, as well as carefully placed Murkoff propaganda that is so blatant it's actually funny. You can see the Murkoff employee injecting the Reagent with something in the middle of a handshake, showing just how sly they can be. Another fun fact is that caffeine, cigarettes and alcohol are prohibited within the sleeping quarters, which seems almost criminal since they're probably the first three things that I would be reaching for in a situation like this to try and cope with this crap. I want to bring some attention to a few of the phrases that can be seen or written on the walls of the facility. We have some Bible verses, such as Matthew 12:43, placed on the walls. In the Bible, Matthew 12:43 says, and I quote, "When an impure spirit comes out of a person, it goes through arid places seeking rest and does not find it." End quote. And we can also find Luke 11:14, which says, and I quote, "Jesus was driving out a demon that was mute. When the demon left, the man who had been mute spoke, and the crowd was amazed." End quote. These two Bible verses really help shape the narrative of change, and even subtly symbolizing that the previous life of the Reagents should be viewed almost like a demon or an impure spirit, something that needed to be cast out or be rid of. At this stage, the Reagent would be sent out on the trials to be examined, judged, and given a score as to their performance. Throughout these trials, we can find documents that give us a clearer picture of how exactly all of this came to be, and some more details on who was involved. So I, along with the help of Lords, have rearranged all of the documents that you can find throughout the game and ordered them chronologically so you can get the unfolding story as it happens, and have picked out only the crucial information from each of the documents since there is so much filler that really isn't relevant. So let's begin. We start off with a document sent by A. Bradley of Valanos to a board of Murkoff Corporation in 1949, stating a proposal for a new business opportunity. He mentions a new opportunity for great revenue in the field of chemical refinement for their new friends at the agency, making the most of the capabilities already established by Murkoff Pharmaceutical. Agency asset P. Halliwell, better known as Paul Halliwell, a real CIA agent which was responsible for the formation of the Sea Supply Corporation, which ran arms to the Thailand police and nationalist Chinese forces in Burma for 10 years between 1951 and 1961. The letter states that he was providing drugs to the Chiang Kai-shek rebels in Thailand and Burma, indirectly funding their anti-communist activities. The agency wishes to expand the operation into Europe and the Middle East, and the CIA contacts within the Sicilians are not capable of refining the drug, lacking the sophistication to do so without risking of blowing the whole thing sky high. It does say that the Corsicans could do it, but the CIA don't want to insult Mr. Luciano, referring to real-life mobster Salvatore Lucania, better known as Lucky Luciano. He was shipping narcotics into New York City in the 40s and early 50s from Italy, Due to this, there is an open position in manufacturing that Murkoff Pharmaceutical could easily fill, and has the added bonus of allowing Murkoff to become part of CIA's extra budgetary activities, meaning a near-limitless global, tax-adjacent revenue stream with powerful legal protective implications. The next file skips a whole 4 years into the future, into 1953, as the CIA interview Mr. Hendrik Julier Easterman. This is the same man that was on screen at the beginning of the game, giving us the whole "I'm your best friend, love me please" spiel. It notes that Easterman is simply a civilian at this stage. Agent Jameson Lawler of the CIA is asking Easterman if he was at Dawes' speech in Princeton. Easterman points out that he doesn't like the tone that Lawler has, saying that it's suggestive, that he already knows the answer despite asking the question. To give some context, the speech in question was from a man named Alan Dawes, who was the deputy director of the CIA. He speaks in 1953 of brain perversion techniques and brain warfare that he claimed were being conducted by the Soviets at the time. Lawler says that brainwashing has already infiltrated the popular imagination, large part due to the speeches of Dawes, saying that only in July of 1952 it was the front page story in every US city. He says that 21 American prisoners of war refused to come home, red-blooded Americans that would rather make a home in communist China than return to the US, telling Easterman that the question they need answered is why in the name of God would anybody given the choice become a communist. Easterman says that what Lawler is talking about is thought reform, something he works strictly out of assumptions based on the German psyche in the lead up to 1933. Lawler agrees and mentions that the notion of belief is the same within dangerous political circles, calling it a subtle menace that is seeping into the culture, advertising, music, etc. Lawler brings up the death of Easterman's brother, who apparently committed self-death. Apologies for the wording, but YouTube is pretty serious about this stuff, but saying that he died in Korea and that he was a lieutenant. Easterman calls out Lawler again about how he asks questions that don't really question, since he already knows the answers to them all before even asking, stating that the reason for his brother's death is unknown, since he died alone and the forensics were sloppy, suggesting that he might have even been murdered. Lawler offers Easterman an opportunity to study what happened to his brother in Korea, stating that the CIA is holding KPA brainwashing subjects in Hong Kong, and they need someone with Easterman's skill set to investigate. We now jump over to a letter sent to the wife of Easterman, named Irene. He asks his wife to burn the letter after reading it, saying he essentially hates Hong Kong life but is fascinated with his initial interviews. He feels certain he will be able to find the evidence needed to prove his brother's murder, saying he interviewed 4 veterans and 1 minister, all of which were prisoners of the Korean People's Army. He hasn't found evidence of psychological programming yet, but does believe that the degree of trauma is impressive. We now jump into 1954, as Easterman has taken to writing personal journal entries about top secret matters that have absolutely no business being anywhere near a goddamn diary. But nonetheless, here we are. He is currently stationed in Berlin, Germany, waiting for his flight back to China. Remembering this is only 9 years after World War II. He is pondering the idea of spoils of war and what it was like before land and treasure. He says in World War II that the spoils of war are instead cultural, saying that National Socialism has much to teach us about infrastructure, propaganda and leadership. The true spoils of war, as he puts it, were reaped in Hiroshima, and the use of weapons that could mean instantaneous global death. In truly meaningless, non-existent extinction, nobody will be remembered because nobody will be around to remember. I must say that is a very bleak outlook on things that has me over here staring blankly into my computer monitor. I mean, I don't know what I was expecting. The Outlast story is hardly rainbows and unicorns, but damn. Easterman says that the agency wants a full investigation into the technique of senile, which translates to wash brain, and they have set Easterman up with an observation post with dozens of veterans to study, both Western and Chinese, already exposed to the techniques. He feels he has found even greater lessons. However, saying that the Chinese Communist parties have celebrated the ideological remodeling of a whole population, which by all indications has already taken hold. He does, however, make the observation that the brainwashed veterans are largely listless, nearly catatonic in between bouts of aggression, calling them more akin to broken children than programmed machines. The next entry is another entry into the personal journal of Dr. Easterman. He believes that he has broken Private Ramus by employing Benzedrine to prep him to a talkative state, but his testimony is filled with repetition and contradiction. He states that the sessions are cut short by the appearance of the Doctor, otherwise referred to as Dr. Skinner, an invisible spectre that manifests whenever Easterman asks directly about Ramus's captors. They increased his dosage of Benzedrine, but it ended up sending the private into a permanent catatonic state. His cardio and galvanograph readings suggest that he is still facing the torments of the Doctor, along with an expression on his face which is twisted into a permanent expression of pain and fear, even comparing the face to a hideous smile on a Japanese Hanya mask. Moving on to April, we have a correspondence between Easterman and Olivia Baranzesk. If you're wondering who Baranzesk is, he was the Assistant Director of Behavioral Medicines at Mount Massive Hospital between 1954 and 1963. You can actually find a picture of him within the Mount Massive Asylum in Outlast 1, on which the game was based. He mentions to Easterman that their mutual friend in the CIA, Jameson Lawler, has been sharing with him about his findings in Hong Kong, and that his research synchronizes remarkably with the dream therapy work that they're working on in Los Alamos at Mount Massive. He says that he has secured agency cooperation to bring Easterman to Los Alamos to meet the Murkoff team of researchers, and that he will be able to find the tickets and documents at his bedside table, before strongly suggesting that he accept the invitation, as the letter he has sent has highly sensitive national security issues, and now that Easterman's knowledge of such activities, even without his active participation, could represent a great security risk that requires some enforceable forms of silence. If you need a translation for that tongue twister, it essentially means accept the invitation or you'll be bird food within the next 24 hours. We can see in another journal entry that the trip to Los Alamos proved fruitful for Easterman, as he mentions reviewing the notes of Dr. Vernick. This is the same doctor that we see in Outlast 1 and also observing the Reagents in the sleep room, the one responsible for the Walrider project, saying that if he were alone in these endeavours, he would categorize him as delusional and damaged from his participation in the Nazi business. But since his work has been thoroughly vetted, he is left feeling unmoored from reality. Another journal entry talks about a time that Easterman visited a bookshop in Santa Fe, as he recalls a favourite monster story from his childhood, a story of a feeble pulp from a slavering fetishist, and mentions a paragraph that has stuck with him as oddly applicable to his new friends over at Los Alamos. I'm going to read the full paragraph in full, as I think it's a pretty interesting one. It is as followed. The most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all of its contents. We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of the black sea of infinity, and it was not meant that we should voyage far. The sciences, each straining in its own direction, have hitherto harmed us little. But someday the piercing together of dissociated knowledge will open up such a terrifying vistas of reality, and of our frightening position therein, that we shall either go mad from the revelation, or flee from the deadly light into the peace safety of a new dark age. A very somber message, but if you aren't quite sure of the meaning, it's essentially a play on the idea that ignorance is bliss. The idea is that what you don't know cannot hurt you, and with that ignorance comes safety. But only when you peer deeper seeking knowledge will you actually begin to understand. This is when you can truly be hurt. I want to make a quick thank you to SSD Daimyo, who commented on our previous video on Outlast Trials story during the beta, and pointed out that the author that Easterman is referring to in this is actually a very famous horror author named H.P. Lovecraft, and the quote is from the end of Call of Cthulhu. So yeah, bonus points for finding that out. Thanks again, Daimyo. Moving on to another journal entry, as Easterman talks about how he has been warned about Dr. Vernick, and describes the phrase, "we can overlook his past for the sake of the future," meaning that Vernick has done some pretty messed up things, but he's too valuable to get rid of. Baranzesk seems to think that Easterman's research into the brainwashing and ideological revision seems to mesh seamlessly with Vernick's work with microwave signals and guided visual stimulation. Easterman attempts to get clarity on Vernick's intentions on his experiences, but is spurred away each time. A strange thing is mentioned at the bottom of the letter, how Vernick mentions that straight relationships are doomed, before Easterman mentions that he is having some strange dreams since arriving at Los Alamos, even stating that Vernick is a vital and handsome man, and that he might even need to request his wife out here to be able to concentrate. The fact that he is having strange dreams is also the unusual and out of blue compliments towards Wernick suggests that Wernick might be using his microwave signaling on Easterman. We now get some interesting new information from news clippings that are transcribed for records for Easterman. It speaks about a deranged airman that murdered a family of 5, and he even did some unconsenting things to the family members, and possibly even several animals as well. The man's name was Jerome Gillette, and before you think it, no, he has no affiliation with the Razor brand. He was 37 and found naked and disorientated among some hogs outside the scene of the crime, and is now being held in an unknown location. He states that he has no memory of the crime, though physical evidence at the scene does prove his guilt obvious. He told officers his last memory was Sunday night's fireworks and mentions being offered chewing gum from a woman in white before blacking out and waking up among hogs. I mean, damn. I've heard of waking up in bushes and stuff like that, but waking up naked surrounded by hogs it's up there. Lawler sends a message to Avelanos in regards to the news clippings about Gillette, saying to have a newspaper curated, that a crime this disgusting and violent, especially committed in public, needs to be sure that the press does not make public any connections between the crime, airbase, or the CIA and Murkoff activities. Avelanos replies that progress is rarely clean and easy, stating that the incident as regrettable, but to think of it as a speed bump in the road. He goes on to mention that Siniala will solve the problem and any issues that could arise in the future, saying that it's now only a matter of money. Murkoff has made a very reasonable proposal for how it could be sourced outside congressional approval. We now head further in time to 1955, as there is another news clipping about a raid on Futterland. 2 police officers are dead, and half a dozen injured during a raid on a studio of disgraced children's variety show host Phyllis Futterman, better known to her fans as Mother Gooseberry. She was charged with conspiracy to commit murder, kidnapping, and racketeering. She has been using her television platform and dental drops business to hook a generation of children on narcotics, violence, theft, and even murder. The police chief described Futterland as the most grotesque architectural perversion since H.H. Holmes' Chicago murder castle. And if you're wondering, H.H. Holmes was a serial killer in Chicago during the 19th century. He's widely regarded as America's first serial killer. He built a whole hotel to act like a maze, with doors to nowhere and secret walls that could change the architecture of the hotel, so he could murder guests. Bad stuff all around. We now get a recommendation letter for Scarfiotti addressed to Avelanos. It mentions that Murkoff is looking for an architect for its project in Arizona, and mentions that a Navy engineer by the name of Moses Scarfiotti. He is a Stanford man, top of his class, and more importantly, one of them. He can be trusted, and the CIA would highly recommend him to be considered for the architect role. It doesn't take Murkoff long before they're formally interviewing Scarfiotti for the role. Scarfiotti asks Avelanos if he has been to Disneyland, and Avelanos responds that he doesn't have any children. Scarfiotti says that it doesn't matter, and that he should go since it's the future, and that Halliwell keeps asking him to go. That's the same Halliwell mentioned earlier in the documents. He says that Disneyland moves people through it, and the shapes instruct the visitors on how to behave, when to be delighted, hungry, compliant, and that it was wonderful. He's never seen so many happy people. Avelanos asks if Scarfiotti knows how Mr. Disney achieved this. This being, you guessed it, the king of the mouse, Walt Disney. Scarfiotti believes that he does, saying that it's so clear once you've seen it, and that there were actually hints of it in Germany. Alright, quick composure break. It's been a lot of documents and it makes my brain hurt as well, but I wanted to give everyone a quick moment to relax. I hope you've enjoyed the video thus far. If you have, maybe consider hitting the like button on the video so other people can see it as well. It would mean a lot. And also, write Reborn in the comments down below so I know that you got this far. Anyway, we should probably get back into it since there is still a very good chunk of files to break down. We now find ourselves in 1956, as Clyde Perry is messaging Avelanos in regards to surveillance on Leland Coyle. He had some altercations with the Oklahoma law enforcement. There was anecdotal evidence of animal abuse and even SA as a child that led to a military academy education. He joined the KKK and married at 19 just for his wife to die 6 months later after falling down the stairs. He then joined the Marines to avoid investigation. He went on to serve 2 years in the Pacific Theater, with 3 confirmed enemy kills and 2 suspicious friendly fire kills in his company as well. He returned back to Oklahoma, resumed activity in the Klan, and then goes on to get into law enforcement. He also keeps very complete notes, and has an inflated view of his own stature within the world. It notes that he is extremely effective as a policeman, gaining enormous profit from exploitation and extortion. He marries a second time, and goes on to extort his new wife's family. That wife's family goes on to die in an electrical fire, and she flees to Chicago before dying of natural causes. If you think that this absolutely insane story ends there, it doesn't. He marries a third time. His third wife apparently self-deads and is found with gunshot wounds in the head. That wife's family dies within a year. All apparent self-deads via increasingly violent and convoluted methodologies. Coyle has been standing in a field watching lightning storms on 5 different occasions, and he displays extreme charisma and is widely popular among his fellow police. I mean, holy crap, Coyle was next level crazy, even for the normal Outlast villain. My man was going for kill streaks. Anyway, back to some letters between Clyde Perry and Avelanos regarding a Coyle interview. Apparently Clyde has arranged to meet Coyle at a bar under the pretense of bribery. It didn't go well, however, as Coyle saw right through Perry and the conversation took a violent turn. Perry states that he had a feeling of being a crippled mouse being used as a plaything by a tomcat, believing that if he had intended to kill him, he would not be writing right now. Once again praising his charisma, and proceeds to highly recommend Coyle for Project LATHE. He goes on to mention that he has 2 broken fingers, a lot of bruising, and even peeing blood to top it all off. Another letter from Perry speaks about Phyllis Futterman, the woman described earlier. An interview was conducted at Holmesburg Prison in North Philadelphia. It describes her as nearly unrecognizable compared to archived photos and mugshots. Futterman, along with majority of inmates, have been subjected to dermatological experiments under the supervision of Dr. Kleekman. Once again, this small detail is based on a real person. This time Dr. Albert Kleekman, who received huge backlash for unethical dermatological experiments in Philadelphia, stemming from ringworm treatment. And in this note, Futterman has been exposed to carbonic acid, dioxin, and grafts of infected flesh. Dear God, ooh. It does say, however, that the other inmates have gotten it much worse. Despite this, her physical health remains remarkable, even if she does look like yesterday's guacamole. And we can learn a little bit more about Mother Gooseberry and a background check done on her. She was the daughter of a Dr. A. Futterman. Her mother was out of the picture. She worked for her father from a young age and used puppets to distract kids during drilling and surgery, as her father was a dentist. She enjoys taxidermy and musical theatre, and the popularity of the Futtermans resulted in a television program called the Mother Gooseberry Hour, which aired in 1951. However, after Dr. Futterman's death, Phyllis suffered hysteria and disassociation. It's also noted that his corpse has not been found. This is an interesting thing to learn, since we know that the name of Mother Gooseberry's puppet is Dr. Futterman, presumably named after her father. And the added fact that Gooseberry also regularly calls the puppet Daddy during conversation also alludes to that point even more. After his death, the tone of the show changed dramatically, conditioning adolescent audiences through abuse and praise, causing the audience to become almost cult-like, engaging in immoral behaviors for her. Police raided the studio in 1955, and Phyllis retreated into the puppetry tunnels beneath the set and used her drill to kill 2 policemen and injure 5 while being apprehended. This resulted in a life sentence to Holmesburg Prison. Interestingly, we can see private communications between Scarfiotti and Avelanos regarding Easterman, explaining how the board is all hot and bothered over the tax savings inherent in populating the trials with charitable outreach centres. The whole operation of running the centres, recruiting volunteers and then trucking them to Sinaloa is a bulletproof tax deduction, and also a clever way to hide money coming in from the CIA. They believe that Easterman will sabotage himself sooner or later, and that the profits will be glorious. Speaking of charity outreach centres, we also have a file that asks to inform Scarfiotti and Avelanos that 37 Murkoff charity outreach centres are now operational and intaking potential patients. An additional 6 centres will open pending signage, since Scarfiotti's insistence that the Murkoff Corporation's branding be limited to the inside of the centre. outside of public view, followed by a list of locations which have centers, which is a majority of the US, but goddamn, Murkoff is having a field day in New York. We get to see an internal letter within Murkoff saying how, in response to the unanticipated volume of patients volunteering at the centers, Murkoff has purchased a controlling share in Liberty Meat Hauling LLC. How nobody found it suspicious that a pharmaceutical company has the need to buy majority shares in a meat hauling company is beyond me. Now, the cost of transporting patient volunteers to the facility is cut by roughly 72%, but the experimental population volunteers will require extra sanitation as apparently the stink is considerable. And Murkoff will continue to transport beef in the cars as well for the return trips, and the sanitation of human waste in the cattle cars is not necessary thanks to recent rollbacks and regulations. This means that all of the volunteers are being transported, hooded, in piles of human and cattle waste. Lovely. Another note can be found from Baron Zest to Avalanos. He asks if he has been monitoring the paperclip work coming out of Los Alamos, as Dr. Vernick's sleep therapy lab is showing an extremely suspicious fixation on the last few Reagents coming out of the Senyala facility. The Senyala facility, by the way, is the one that's being used in Outlast Trials. Apparently, Baron Zesk has a secretary who eavesdrops on Vernick, as she can also speak German. Vernick said that Easterman may have made the most fruitful mistake in modern science since the creation of penicillin. Baron Zesk sees this as a provocative statement and is cautious to put too much stock into Vernick's words on account of his cynicism and condensation of all things American, but asks Avalanos to tell him about paperclip activities in Los Alamos, and in return he will share details with him. A personal report regarding a report to the board about Project LATHE's death count. The following list is the tally of deaths and injuries incurred by Dr. Easterman's limbic aggression therapy, better known as Project LATHE. 109 from the Regents, 32 staff security, 8 research staff, 17 maintenance staff, and even the visitors aren't safe with 5. Quite the body count. And it's stressed that no redesign or hardening will make the trial environments at the Senyala facility acceptably safe, and as a result, strongly suggesting immediate shutdown. Another correspondence of Easterman can be found as he sends a letter to Baron Zesk. He is essentially sucking up to him, saying how he has always admired his character, especially as he will soon be making a recommendation to the board on whether or not Senyala will continue receiving funding. He goes on to say that they have found a way to salvage current resources and push forward into even more exciting research, since Project LATHE created psychotics, which has been a partial success. They are working to create agents willing to do anything, even murder if necessary, but they currently lack the necessary subtlety and control, since it was based on classical apparent conditioning, focusing on subconscious triggers. Calling it crude, but it has been revealed an unexpected and extremely promising side effect. The setbacks have left Murkoff with an enormous number of LATHE subjects for autopsy, and those revealed strange tumor-like growths in the parietal lobes. Easterman believes that this suggests an avenue for more precise form of apparent conditioning, and he will spend the next few days creating proof of concept for which he can share his theory with Baron Zesk. A journal entry from Easterman mentions how he believes Scarfiotti to be conspiring against him using the recent events of LATHE as evidence of his incompetence, stating that transference is common in therapy. Prime assets, such as Mother Gooseberry, apparently sees Easterman as a proxy to her father, while Coyle was projecting a veritable parade of murder victims to his feet. He says that accidents happen, and people die. He takes full responsibility but clarifies that science is a matter of experimentation, and since they can't control the prime assets, it also means that they can't control the experimental population. If Project LATHE is allowed to collapse, all of them will be liquidated. He thinks that if life gives you lemons, then you need to make some goddamn lemonade. Since LATHE proved reprogramming is possible, he will use the trial environments, along with the prime assets and their ex-population, will be the anvil to which they hammer the true subjects. From this point on, he wants meaningless test subjects, neither damaged and broken mental patients, nor charismatic killers like Gooseberry and Coyle. He wants the vanquishable, the unloved and unformed, subjects that are the opposite of special. And this is who we play as, the downtrodden. Men and women that are down on their luck in society, and also with the added bonus of nobody searching for them if they were to go missing. Easterman, and by proxy Murkoff, wish to take advantage of these types of people. Easterman has a conversation with Scarfiotti and Avalanos in regards to this realization, stating that Gooseberry, Whitehorn, and Coyle have developed a cult of personality. This is the opposite of what he needs, asking instead for blank canvases, those lost and hopeless, people who can break into nothing. Avalanos says that they already had that in the experimental population from Mount Massive Hospital, which Easterman refutes, since they were only full of damage and trauma. They couldn't empty them out, only shoveling in more damage and more trauma. Avalanos mentions that Easterman has his attention, before Easterman mentions that we would only be throwing away Murkoff's money if they were to shut it down. Instead, by pivoting to the next phase, there will be no added cost outside of getting the new Reagents, saying that once the next generation of Reagents are finished, they will be ready to release them into the world, acting as agents that can be released into the culture and cause change without being consumed by the system. Avalanos calls out the fact that this was the initial promise, yet now there are millions of dollars into failure. Easterman believes that this could make history, and not just in the sense of the idiom, meaning that they could literally make history. Easterman now begins to look into the autopsies of the previous subjects, and after searching dozens of brains, has realized that there is zero correlation between the stimulus and lesion growth. The only consistency close to even being interesting is a shared vision of this Skinner man, some nightmarish man that makes his way through the test subjects. But that isn't science. He begins to lose hope as he states that Murkoff will shut down LATHE, calling it a disaster. However, desperate times call for desperate measures, so Easterman sends another message to Baron Zesk saying how the proof of concept was a phenomenal success, stating that the parietal lesions formed just as expected, allowing him to adjust the cortical homunculi with surprising precision. Once conditioned, Murkoff will be able to set predetermined behaviors in the subject's brain. Belief will then follow, making subtle adjustments that can make agents capable of almost anything, using feelings like temptation and addiction to help encourage the subject to follow the order, and then once acted upon, the motivation of that temptation will follow. He asks once more for Baron Zesk to continue Project LATHE, stating that it will be Murkoff's century. It doesn't actually take long to get confirmation that Project LATHE 2 will be officially authorized, now changing the name from the limbic aggression therapy and documentation to latent agency therapy. Also, mentioning that overall operational costs should also be much less than Phase 1, and that oversight from Los Alamos and cooperation and influx will also be minimal from Mount Massive going forward. An interesting discussion is had between Easterman and Scarfiotti regarding what exactly they are doing to the Reagents. Easterman mentions that they are not creating behaviors in the region, but instead they're creating complexes. A psychological complex has a story, it's pain mixed in with the story. Using the example that if somebody is frequently burned with cigarettes, they will quickly learn a fear response to a smoldering cigarette, and their behavior will change to avoid cigarettes from that point on. Now, let's say that somebody is frequently burned with cigarettes by, say, their mother, who is beautiful and voluptuous. Not entirely sure why that's relevant, but we'll move on. She whispers to you, "I love you, but the donuts are making you fat." That person hasn't learned a behavior, that person has now created a complex. It creates contradictory objectives, justice through lies, faith through absurdity, mercy through violence, or in this case, for the example, love through punishment. It doesn't require much redesign either. Coyle will believe that he is the law in his own private fiefdom, while Gooseberry will believe that she is in her own make-believe world of childhood joy. That belief will allow them to control the X-Pops to create a furnace of complexes that will hopefully burn away the Regent's personalities. We also get some more information into the research that Easterman did in regards to the Skinner man. He mentions that the influx of funding was so unexpected that he initially believed it to be an accounting error. Baron Zesk is insisting that Easterman share his results with the paperclip team in Los Alamos, especially when it comes to the Skinner man. He thinks it's ridiculous since it's just dreams, but does point out that Wernick thinks that everything is possible in dreams. One of the sleep room observers suggested that the Skinner man is actually a reflection of Easterman, simply because he overheard Regents calling it Dr. Skinner. He thinks that this is ridiculous and mentions that the correlation between heart attacks and strokes with the Skinner man's appearance is only that. We now get some surveillance documents regarding some ex-Reagents, including Reagent 0877, which was viewed as uneventful. They attended a baseball game and had 2 meals at a diner, a relatively uneventful month overall. Meanwhile, Reagent 0946 was actually quite eventful. The subject exited the apartment before dawn, walked through the residential neighborhood and observed a bird falling from the sky. The subject then stepped on the bird dead. They then proceeded to have 2 fits of crying throughout the day, 1 fit of uncontrollable laughter, and then went on to perform their job well. It was overheard as well that the subject believed that the bird fell from the sky with the power of the mind. The next file mentions that Reagent 0946 had to be terminated and is now awaiting cleanup. The subject was observed at a theater and approached a group of adolescents, claiming that they had extrasensory abilities. The adolescents laughed and fled, but the subject followed them. The subject tried to climb into the house of the youngest adolescents, roughly 12 years old. They were then intercepted and engaged the subject into a physical altercation. Apparently it took 6 shots to the head and chest and a garrote to finish the job. However, you may remember the boring Reagent. Well, Avalonos has requested them to be retrieved and transported to our office in Los Alamos for further study. Baron Zesk will be there to retrieve and process the patient. Afterwards, Baron Zesk sends a message to Easterman regarding 0877, mentioning that the Reagent has proven a remarkable inspiration to paperclip guests. Avalonos told Baron Zesk that it's rare for one of your test subjects to survive as long as 0877, and hopes for more to achieve similar ascendance, and will increase funding per Los Alamos' contributions. Reagent 0877 is also the subject that Vernick compared to being like the modern-day discovery of penicillin. There are quite a few theories online that suggest that Reagent 0877 might actually be Sullivan Noth from Outlast 2. Due to some interesting connections between the two and also notable things in regards to the final objective of Outlast Trials, which we will get into at the end. That could be a whole video on its own, and I won't go too much into detail here as this video will already be a long one, but worth checking out if you have the time. Not much longer to go, let's finish up these documents. Another Reagent, 1616, was fired from the shoe department over misconduct with a customer. They were later observed in an emotional state and all trigger tests were successful. They had lapses in memory and sporadic bouts of near catatonic behavior. The subject wandered the town, continued to use metal objects to press around their eye and mouth, and continues looking in different directions, which the surveillance team did note as strange. The same subject sells all of their possessions and boards a bus to Albuquerque, New Mexico. Once there, they apply for multiple jobs, and is also noted as having an abiding interest in the ladies. They speak to a woman, described as a loose character. Bit of a rough observation, but they display good charisma and manage to take the woman back to their hotel room. They then used the test trigger while they were inside, and apparently the subject showed exceptional and immediate results. Lethal outcome before neutralization was possible, and cleanup is now required. The subject continues on day 15 of surveillance to show odd behavior with metal objects, even pretending to be a human compass. He then holds the metal thing to his eye or mouth and turns in circles and ends up heading west and northwest. The observation team used a map to trace the headings from the human compass, starting with points in Fort Worth and Albuquerque, with the lines connecting within 40 miles of the Senyala facility. They note that the subject could be picking up on some kind of signal. And that is every single document that you can find in Outlast Trials. 53 if you want the exact number. However, that is not the end. Once the subject has completed the 3 trials and completed Program X, which is just redoing the previous trials under harder conditions, the Reagent will receive tokens that can be spent to allow them to be reborn. Once paid to the security officer, you will once again be greeted by Easterman. He explains that the trials are now inside them, and they only need to survive one final test to escape this place for good, calling them the perfect weapon, the most innocent child ever born. The future. We once again see the hostess mannequin as she mentions that the boxes on the table are tokens for our new life, public records and private files. Your task is to take them to the appropriate authorities, placing them back in the locations that you took them from the previous files at the beginning of the journey. You will then be tasked with deciphering the final tests, which will be putting everything that you have learnt throughout the previous 3 trials to the test. Once you exit the door, the Reagent will appear in water, with a large white glow on the horizon which you can actually run towards. I must say, the sound is very similar to a light that can be seen and heard in Outlast 2. You awake inside your home with blood on your hands and feet, having no memory of how you got into your current location, as the phone begins to ring. On the phone, you hear Easterman tell you 3 words: Spider, Eye, Lamb. The trigger words needed to turn you into a special agent that they need you to be. And thus ends the story of Outlast Trials. I found similarities to Outlast 2 at the end to be quite fascinating, as the verses mentioned from Martis were Spider-Eyed Lamb, a further connection to North's Gospel, and is possibly influenced completely by Murkoff. And also, one of the devs did mention that the facility is located near Temple Gate in Outlast 2, which does help with that theory. But regardless, I really hope that you enjoyed the video. Remember to put Reborn in the comments down below and let me know that you got this far. This was a lot of work to get done, so I hope that you found it helpful or informative. If you did, throw a like on the video as it helps us out immensely. And also remember to subscribe for more content in the future. Also, if you're interested in what actually transpires when you're running through the trials within the facility, be sure to go and check out this video to get all the details. Until next time, peace.